Hello, Earthlings. You're listening to the Environment and Science podcast, The Earth Show. In previous weeks on the show, we've had a whole host of brilliant guests, all working with a common issue in mind, our environment. And for a lot of us, this may be an important topic for us too. We may wonder what we can do to make a difference, how we can use our influence and careers to set about change, whether we be starting out or already be partway along an established career route. But it's not always easy to know where to start, especially if we don't have connections or experience in the area. And that's where the importance of having a community to learn and grow with comes in. And somebody who's created just this is Rhian Sherrington. To introduce her properly, Rhian, FSRA, MSci, is founder of the Women in Sustainability Network, or WINS, a global women's network of sustainability professionals on a mission to impact positive change and influence. Through the WINS membership and wider community, the network has helped over 10,000 women to flourish in their careers and take the lead in businesses tackling the climate and ecological emergencies. As an executive and career transitions coach with over 14 years' experience, Rhian has personally supported hundreds of women to shift mindsets, adopt new behaviours, and nurture an inner resilience as they sought to transition and grow their careers in sustainability. She is also an award-winning author and the creator of the ACT, or Awesome Career Transition Programme, a group coaching experience facilitating the shift of impact-driven individuals into more sustainable, people-planet-focused careers. And in 2023, Rhian was named as one of the UK's top 5 green voices by LinkedIn for her expertise on regenerative leadership and women's leadership in the sustainability sector. And it's an absolute honour to have her with us today over Zoom. So thank you so much for your time, Rhian, and for coming on the show today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been lovely to meet you already, and we've had a nice chat before the show. We're both recording at home, so hopefully you won't hear our dogs too much during today's show. But I think the first place we have to start with today to get to know you as a person, you've obviously had a really interesting career, and we will be talking about that in the show. But what I want to start with first is your passion for our planet and what's led to that. Why do you care so much about our planet?
Well, it's beautiful, isn't it? And it's our only one. I think it started as a child. I must have been about 7 or 8, and I think we must have had a talk in school. And because I know I came home and was talking about we've got to recycle, and I suddenly became quite aware of how wasteful we were and why were we throwing all this stuff away. So I think that triggered my curiosity about why were we doing that. And then I started to, I was never somebody who was really into fashion. I never used to buy all the latest things really. And particularly by the time I hit my sixth form, I was the retro girl. You know, I was always buying my dresses for the big dues at the end of term from the vintage shop. So I think I always had that sense of being resourceful and looking after things. But then I had the pleasure of going on a few expeditions when I was at university to northeast Greenland and then to Pakistan. And I think I really just traveling the world a little bit and sort of having my eyes open to not just the beauty, the fundamental beauty of this planet, but also the inequality and the fact I was just so lucky to have landed up here because compared to other places, you know, so I think that's where it came from. It was sort of really starting to appreciate what was around me and how we were using things, and then that grew into this bigger understanding. And I think also I had to read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson or just before I went up to university. It was a sort of a pre-course reading list for my geography degree. And I think I was just horrified, absolutely horrified to read that book, to realize the destruction that was already being clocked in the early 70s. So that was probably one of that sort of real moments where you go, gosh, this is such a special place and we are not looking after it.
It's really interesting how early on you began to care. You know, you can note that you were starting to care, when you were in primary school and you were
Yeah.
taught about it. And it's a really personal journey for everyone, I think, their
Mm.
relationship with the environment, and at different stages in people's lives, they have different realizations. Obviously for you, it started very young. And was that something that kind of motivated you to study geography?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, I had my mum was a geography teacher, but I used to tease her about that because I used to say, "Oh, you live your geography too much, mum." When she was talking about the landscape. But to her credit, she must have planted some,
See.
seeds of appreciation of what I could see. And yeah, geography is a brilliant degree, absolutely brilliant degree. It keeps you, I really learned so much about the world, and from the perspective I see now, geography is a very good degree to get because it can take you into so many different directions and give you so many different skills that employers are looking for. But oh yeah, definitely it was fundamental in my choice there.
That is a wonderful introduction to Rhian. We're going to talk to Rhian after some music now about actually what the Women's Sustainability Network does, how it works, how it's been successful, and it's a really interesting story about how it started too. Hello and welcome back to the Earth Show with me, Alicia, joined by the founder of the Women in Sustainability Network, Rhian Sherrington, today to talk about her work and what's led her to this point in her career. So we had a great introduction to Rhian before. Obviously, the environment has been something that has mattered to you for a very long time, Rhian. You mentioned all the way from when you were very little, coming home from school and talking about recycling, to obviously what it's led you to do now. But in terms of the Women in Sustainability Network, how have your own experiences led you to evolving into creating this? What has your own career path been leading up to this?
Well, I think I've taken a very varied career path. I've had many weaves along the way, and I've always followed my heart. So I taught A-level field studies geography on the Isle of Arran. I ran an expeditions company taking young people to Ecuador. I worked for Sustrans as a behaviour change specialist and did a lot of work on encouraging walking and cycling to school. And I've been an advisor to central government on a big sort of sustainability strategy involving schools as well. But I guess the crux came to me, the point of inflection of change, real change, was when I started to really question what could I do, really using my talents and my strengths that I have. What could I really do to make it the biggest impact I could have? And it came at a time when I realized through the work I was doing with around behavior change that people won't change their behavior if they're so deeply unhappy. And actually our capitalist consumer-based society really does not make people happy. And so I felt that we were fighting this uphill battle trying to create change when actually a lot of people are too immersed in the day to day to really think beyond that and beyond themselves. So I got very interested in positive psychology, got very interested in, what does it take to make people flourish? How can we create those kind of places and spaces where people can really thrive? And that led me to two things. It led me to coaching. So I retrained to become a professional coach. And it made me then fully realize that everything actually that we can do to make ourselves thrive in our lives is also really good for the planet. So that enabled me then to do a big leap and set up my own coaching company. And I left at a time bit as an employee when also I think I was having a shift in values, and my values was not aligning with the organizational values that I was in. And also I was experiencing some of this frustration of becoming fairly senior and having to work more and more in quite a male dominated environment. And some of the behaviors I had to tolerate were just not acceptable. Some of the microaggressions I was experiencing. And that was quite a surprise to me because I never really used to think about this, and I know I'm not alone. You know, when you're a younger woman, you often don't even think about the difference between you and your male colleagues. But as you progress, maybe stop and have children, some of the differences and some of the unconscious bias started to sort of raise its ugly head. But it was only when I actually started to then try and network and get out there with my coaching business that I came across a women's only business group. And it was seriously was like a light bulb going on off, because it was like, wow, you know, wow, women really listen. Oh, I'm not being spoken over. You know, and the lovely sense of support in this environment was really amazing to see. So I helped lead that group for about a year, but I got bit disenchanted with it because they weren't my people. They didn't care for the planet. They didn't share my values. So I had a bit of a moan to a business mentor that I was working with at the time. And he was like, well, why don't you see if there's any appetite to set up your own little group? And that really triggered something in me, because I could really see that women like me, when I'd been back in, you know, that place I'd been, it's you often don't feel that you can take your issues to people in work. You kind of need to step outside that, and you need to access a place where it's a psychologically safe space where you can really talk about your challenges and find solutions and have that sounding board. And I think the women of Bristol, because that's where I started, they seem to have agreed with me, because that first meeting I had about 80 women rock up. And it kind of just triggered this whole sort of, wow, actually, what can we do to create spaces where women can come together and feel they belong, you know, feel that they belong. And I think this is the heart of a lot of the challenge I see in the world, is that I think a lot of us are feeling that disconnection from ourselves, disconnection from nature. Actually, the Welsh have got a really beautiful word for this. It's called hiraeth, which is a longing for belonging. And I think that's what I was missing. I was missing my community. And I could see that perhaps I could try and create something where women could feel that they could belong, and then together we could then sort of come up with our solutions. So that's kind of where it started. I never meant to set out to create a global network. That was never my intention. And I've always taken a sort of light-hearted approach of gone, well, if it wants to grow, let's just see what happens. So yeah, that's kind of where I started and where it came from.
It's so interesting how, I mean, it's the same for a lot of people in life. You start off doing one thing and then you end up in something in a different alleyway. That I guess there's a lot of similarities to maybe previous work and previous areas you're in, but you never, like you say, were expecting to end up founding this society, which has obviously been really successful. I want to ask you about, in terms of when you first set it up, you just said your first meeting, you got 80 people, which is, for me anyway, that's an enormous number. How did you reach that many people to start with? Do you think it was just because there was such a thirst for it when you kind of advertised?
Well, I think by that point, I was fairly embedded in the sort of green scene in Bristol. Lots of my friends I met at work. So my friendship group, you know, I guess I was completely in that bubble of do-gooders. And Bristol's a very interesting city. You know, it has got a very thriving environmental heart, actually. It's a very creative city, but it's also a very, very green environmental city. And so once you start to put out the feelers, once I started to say, and this is what's happening, this is what's happening, and people then would spread the word. Because at that point, I mean, there's so many different women in groups now, you perhaps wouldn't think it, but this is our 10th year anniversary this year. But 10 years ago, this was brand new. There was nobody really. There was the women in sort of like big sort of industrial societies, but this was fairly unheard of. And so I think that novelty, and then they really enjoyed that experience of coming together and experiencing what does it feel like to come together as women to really talk about what they were experiencing. And right from the very start, I have to say, I took a coaching-led approach to it. So this was never going to be, it was never a moaning shop. And I've always said, you know, this is for women, those who identify as women or non-binary. And the reason why we're coming together is, women love to come together. It's something how we support one another very, very naturally. And it's not that these are better conversations with men in the room. They are just different conversations. And these different conversations really enable and empower women to resolve all sorts of things, because I passionately believe that women don't need fixing. It's just that we're trying to force women to be something they're not, in a very much a male shaped role. We've only got to look at some of the statistics out there, but you know, the world has been designed around men, and for women who are trying to create change, it's a double bind. You're a woman trying to create change, trying to drive through sustainability, and you've got this double thing going against you, which when you stop and think about it, you're like, right, how can I find that support to keep me going? And that's when community becomes so important.
It's really interesting what you say about when you have women, just a women's or women's and non-binary conversation, that it's not necessarily better, but it's different, and it's kind of allowing women to access those different areas and have those different conversations to really bring forward more change than you'd get if you didn't create a space like that. And so I guess something that our listeners will probably be wanting to know is, how logistically does it work? You've got this big network of people. How do you empower each other? How do you have these conversations when there are so many of you involved?
Well, it's come in two halves, the story of women's sustainability, because up to COVID, we had lots of little hubs springing up around the UK, over in Germany and over in New York, and it was run under a licensed business model. So I had all the support, the resources, the branding, the training, and we'd package that all up. And some amazing women I've been absolutely blessed with, wanted to come and lead a hub in their city area or in their location, and then they developed, with support from us, a sort of a program of in-person events where we were always focusing on finding the solutions to the challenges. And we did research, we did all sorts of different surveys, so we knew what were the topics, and that's how it was growing. So it would come with this sort of package of coming together on a bi-monthly basis and enjoying that experience of being in person. Just before COVID, I had started a beta group of an online membership, because there were lots of women who couldn't get to these centres. And I kept on having these emails, oh, when are you coming to X, Y, and Z? And I'm going, oh, a bit small, don't think we can get somebody to run this there. So I started this online membership, again, with very much a focus on sort of how can we support that personal growth and professional development. And when COVID hit, we just put everything online. That's what we did for a good year. And we managed to keep lots of things going, but then the world all shifted, didn't it? All shifted, and we didn't really want to go back to events. We started to be pigeonholed as, we did events, and it's like, we don't do events. We're about personal growth and career progression and supporting you as a business owner. So that's when we've really focused on the membership. And so you can engage and learn from us in lots of different ways. On a very basic level, we're very active on social, very active on LinkedIn, share a lot of content, and really helping to amplify women's voices in this space, and bring together a whole smorgasbord, if you like, of different things that we know are helpful and interesting, mixing both that sustainability, innovation ideas, but also with this personal growth and professional development. And then, but then we've got the membership, so you can pay to be a member, and then you access about 5 live sessions a month. We have a career circle, a business circle. We have a very much a regenerative, nature-focused circle. We have all sorts of guest experts that come and do online workshops with us. And you don't need actually to be a member to access some of those online workshops or seminars. That's just the ticketed events and things like that. But watch this space, because there are new things emerging, which I can't talk about right now, but we are going to be offering slightly different ways to sort of get involved with this as well, which hopefully will be a slightly different way of doing it. So that's what we do. We do partner with different organizations as well to sort of support different campaigns. We're not a campaigning organization, but we support the work of She Changes Climate, for example, which are really there campaigning for gender equality in the leadership, tackling climate change around the world. So that's the kind of thing that we do.
It's an incredible breadth of different things that you're involved in then, really. And I guess different people at different stages in their career paths or involved with different things have different kind of resources and different kind of knowledge they want to tap into, and it's not going to be the same for everyone, is it?
No, I think one of the most popular session types that we do is our peer mentoring session, which we do once a month, and we have an absolute range of women attending. Some, as you said, just starting out, and some very senior, some running their own businesses, some very much working different careers, from all sorts of, from waste to shipping to journalism, communications, a real range. But that's the beauty of it, because they all come together and we go into small groups using Zoom, and we have these little heart seats or hotspot seats, and people share what's a challenge or an issue, and they have access to the sounding board and the wisdom, and we offer a nice structure to make sure that it's a good session, so it's not just moaning and not just somebody just going, and you should do it like this and you should do it like this. It's a very constructive, friendly space. So that's one of my favorite sessions, I think, that we do.
It's such an important thing, though, that you are focusing on those constructive conversations, because whilst I'm not in a working kind of industry as such, I've been in many situations, whether that's just projects I've done at university or wherever, where people have just been kind of chipping down at ideas and moaning about different things, and you don't actually end up with something productive to take forward. So having that structure seems like a really important part of having those constructive conversations and making that progress.
Yeah, I was going to say that one thing that's helpful, I think, is we try to model the kind of techniques and skills that then the women are taking back into the workplace. So, for example, how do you do active listening? What does that look like? How do you experience that? And then that becomes something that they can then go and use.
Yeah, giving them that tool to take forward with them.
That's really interesting to hear about where the Women in Sustainability Network has come from and how it works in practice, really. We're going to have a very short break, and then we will come back to talk a bit more about
some of the success stories of the Women in Sustainability Network and answer some listener questions too that have been sent in advance of today's show. Hello and welcome back to the Earth Show on Radio Alti with me, Alicia, joined today by the founder of the Women in Sustainability Network, or WINS, Rhian Sherrington. And we had a really interesting introduction before the music break then as to what the Women in Sustainability Network actually stands for, what it does. But now I want to focus it a minute and talk about some examples of some success stories and some particular work that the Women in Sustainability Network has done. So when I say that to you, Rhian, does anything come to mind?
I guess there's definitely like 2, 3, 4 women who immediately pop into my head. Two slightly older women who were working by themselves, feeling, trying to do that sustainability consultancy work. They had left full-time employment to work for themselves, but that, it's a big leap doing that, and they were definitely feeling a bit too isolated and really wanted to find a way to connect with other women again. And that the collaboration now that came out of being a member and sort of meeting online and sort of doing that exploration, which comes from, I guess, what we do, you sort of create that place where women can really meet and connect with one another. And this was an example of online, that they've gone on to develop a really successful business together around carbon literacy training. And that's been lovely, because you just see how that's a lovely example of having an effective network which supports you individually to have that space to grow and learn together, but then it can lead to real active collaboration, which then makes them really far more effective running their businesses. And then there's another lady that really comes to mind who came to one of my very first in-person events in London, and just started to have that opportunity to reflect where does she really want to take her career, and that invitation that we always say, take not necessarily control, but take awareness to your career. Don't expect other people to look after your career path. You're in charge of your career path. So you really need to think about your strengths, really need to think about what your values are, really connect to what's truly important to you, and then be proactive in guiding yourself in a pathway, so you can really feel that sense of satisfaction and fulfillment. And she really took those messages to heart and really took that effort into where she wanted to take her career, and she's doing incredibly well. I think she's now probably on her third role, and she's just doing brilliantly. I won't say who she is because I don't have permission to share her story, but she's now ahead of and within that sort of 8 years, she's done incredibly well, sort of finding that. And I know from what she shared to me, it's through the people she's met through the network, it's through the sort of group coaching we do. There's a masterclass that people can do around doing a career audit. So some of the stuff we touch upon, she may have been able to access that in work, but it was not the environment that was really conducive for her to really think about what she was doing. But that's really then enabled her to really grow and believe in herself and just sort of do all these things. I don't think women lack confidence at all, but sometimes the environment they're in, it doesn't doesn't give them what they need in order to really show up like that. So I think that's one of the lovely stories I think for her. And I think also, generally speaking, just seeing the difference, having, you finish a call and seeing people being able to know that there's somebody there. Like there's also other stories, like a couple of people have set up an accountability group because they needed somebody they could go to sort of keep them on track for various projects. And we've had numerous groups. We've had WhatsApp groups set up through people who've met through what we've been doing and then have created that themselves, and that's been incredibly powerful. You have people coming online together to do some focused writing work together. So there's all sorts of different ways it's sort of been taken, either in terms of thinking about career progression, but also practically people finding a lot of support. And I would say, I mean, one story I thought was lovely is what one person told me, you did save me in COVID. You absolutely saved me in COVID. And I was so close to being so depressed and isolated that having access to what you were doing, meeting all these wonderful women, that made a huge difference when I was just stuck at home. So that I'm very proud of that one.
I think a lot of people can probably relate to different emotions that you described in those kind of examples, that idea of some people really losing direction and feeling isolated in COVID, and the importance of a network in that, or somebody kind of not maybe kind of having the support around them to develop their idea. You were mentioning about those people who ended up collaborating. I mean, I think if there's any success story from a network, that's an exact example of where people have, because of a network, been able to find people who have maybe a very similar idea, who can really support and kind of develop and work together into what they want. So I think, as a listener, being somebody at the start of my career, it's really great to kind of hear about, that there are supportive networks who are all about working together and guiding each other and really helping each other move forward, as opposed to it being a competitive environment, say, where people are not necessarily helping one another. But it kind of leads me nicely into quite a few questions I've had from listeners. So prior to the show today, I sent out a message on social media asking people if they had any questions for you. And one of the questions, which I think we've touched on a bit, but I think is a really important thing to discuss, is somebody has asked, why do you think there's still a need for women's networks? Do you think there's still a need for them?
Absolutely. There's definitely, I wish there wasn't, but people seem to think that gender equality is sorted in this country. It's not sorted. You look at who's actually leading our organizations. Women are still, there's a dearth of women. And it goes back, I think, to some of the unconscious bias that's there. There's all sorts of research and statistics that talks about the airtime that women have in meetings, the gender pay gap. But fundamentally, we live in this sort of very patriarchal, capitalist consumer society. That is our culture. And it's a culture and a society that has got still very strong embedded unconscious bias. And there are some women that do not need a women's network. And it's not for every woman. Absolutely, it's not. Because they're happy being that. They're happy thriving in that kind of environment where they'll do it their way and they fit in. But many women don't feel that, and often if they are in a gender minority in their place of work, it just makes them second guess what they're doing. And it just has this, for any kind of diversity, for any kind of minority, the same thing happens. You start to feel you don't belong, you don't fit in. And we know the research talks about all this unconscious bias that's there for women, particularly women of color. And so that's why I think we still need networks, and particularly in those STEM-based careers, which sustainability goes into. You get that balance when you've got 50-50. Women start to be able to contribute properly when you've got, two or three in the room. That's when you start to have that impact. And I think right now we've got quite an alarming thing arising, because people are sort of feeling that feminism and equality is kind of overdone, and that men now are being disadvantaged. Well, I think a lot of men still have a lot of relative advantage, actually. So I think we have to question that. But what I want to be very clear, that this is not an us and them. It's never been an us and them. Just because you support one minority doesn't mean to say you're attacking the other, or thinking there's something wrong. This is about actually working out what supports different people to really flourish. And for some women, being in a sort of a women-only environment is deeply supportive, and that enables them to take themselves into those other places where they are at a relative disadvantage, to then be able to show up and have the influence and impact that they want. And I think one other thing I would say, equality doesn't just benefit women, it benefits men as well. In fact, everybody thrives far better when we have that equality. So I do look forward to the day when I do not need to run a women's network, but we are still needed.
That's really interesting. And I mean, being a young female myself, I completely relate to the idea that for some people, like you said, it's not the place for everyone. But for myself, for example, being in a situation where there is only women sometimes actually can provide that really safe, really different kind of space where you can voice concerns in a different way, and where you can collaborate in a different way. But I completely also agree with your point of the fact that it's not there to disadvantage men by having a women's only network. It's to provide a different space. And I do agree with you. I think at this point in time, we definitely don't have an equal society in all different ethnicities, different genders. There's so much inequality, and creating those networks and those spaces to allow people who are disadvantaged in one way or another to flourish is a really important thing we have to do as a society still.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'd flag is there's a lovely network called Diversity in Sustainability, and they have a lovely group as well. And I think they're doing some great work. They've produced some great research. They're quite active. So, we try to collaborate with all sorts of different people, and that would be one group. We try and share their research and what they're doing, because I think it is important to feel that you've got a place that you can belong, and then that equips you then in all sorts of different ways that then you can take that back out to a good effect.
Brilliant. So moving on to another question I've got from a listener of the show. Somebody has asked, if you're a women's network, does that mean you focus more on women's related issues to the environment? So they've used the example of like women's products, so women's sanitary products. Does it mean being a women's network, you focus more on women's ideas, or do you kind of look at all of the environment and all of those things that involves?
That's a lovely question. What we do is we go to the heart of what does it mean to be a woman? How do we resource ourselves? And actually, women, like all of us, when we have a deep connection to nature, it really, really helps us. So we have this regenerative framework, and through that we look at the nature's living seasons. So we sort of really tune into what nature's doing. We look at the lunar cycle, we look at the menstrual cycle. So absolutely, we're talking about very sort of female sort of specific issues, and how that impacts how we turn up at the workplace, and how that affects our productivity and our focus. And we equip people with the language to be able to talk about, I guess, this regenerative approach to being. And if listeners are interested, there's a huge movement out there talking about, it's not about what we do, it's how we are. And actually, we're in this planetary crisis that we're in because of us. It's our mindsets, how we approach things. So in addition to having diversity of thought, it's about we need we need to recognize this feminine and masculine imbalance. So we really weave that in. I don't think we really focus on feminine products and things like that. That's not really what we do, but we've tried to find that balance between talking about the sustainability areas of challenge that are of interest. For example, we just talked about the digital carbon footprint recently. That was a big workshop. And then the other month we did all about the power of the menstrual cycle. So that kind of sort of shows the mix that we have. So it's sort of personal growth, professional development, and sustainability type issues.
Brilliant. So someone's asked a more general question about sustainability, I'd say, and they've asked, what 3 things can they do in their life to make the biggest impact? What are the biggest 3 things for you when it comes to making yourself more sustainable, whether that be in your career or be in your daily life?
So I think right from the word go, one of the biggest impacts everybody can have is to think about where your money is. So really look at your bank. You know, everybody's got a bank account, and if you started saving for, putting in for a pension, really look to see. And My Money Matters and My Mother Tree are 2 great resources, because our money, where our money is, probably has the biggest impact, far more than protesting or not buying plastic. I think look at where your money is and look where you're saving, and empower others to move their money into the right place. I think we can all do a lot. I mean, we mustn't forget about, we've got a biodiversity collapse going on, and I think really thinking about how can you support nature. I think that's a key area, even if it's a windowsill pot or growing a few herbs, so that you're doing that. But support those sort of local initiatives for local food. Think about what's in your garden. Could you create log piles? All these little things, but they all add up. And then for those who vote, if you can vote, go and vote and make it a climate vote. Really think very carefully. So that's in relation to obviously the UK and now what's happening now. But we need more women in politics, and we need people to pay attention to local and national politics and vote for those politicians that are going to actually do what's required of them. One thing that we're really seeing is that sustainability is not the job of the sustainability professional. Sustainability is everybody's job, and you can actually weave in sustainability into any job that you're doing. And I think that's what's really exciting, and we're seeing that at leadership level. You're seeing a lot more different types of it's not just your chief sustainability officer. You've got all sorts of people taking on responsibility for sustainability, and that's coming out everywhere. So I think that's quite an exciting place to be when you think about your career, because actually you could be bringing this into what you're currently interested in. Just think about how you can weave that in, because I think it will be embedded. Sustainability is just good business, and thinking about the planet is good business, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing. Sustainability as a profession has one of the highest levels of qualification requirements, which has been flagged as a barrier. It certainly is a barrier for diverse or would-be diverse professionals. But at the moment it is very high, so that's something to bear in mind. But I think every job could be a sustainability job, so that's something to really think about and consider.
And obviously part of this is about calling people to action, but we do see, we're seeing on the news all the time, you are seeing a shift in people's mindset. It might not be as quick as we want to see. I think that's often discussed, but we are seeing a shift, and it is working its way into everyone's kind of jobs and roles.
I mean, we can all influence. I think this is it. We forget the power of the conversation, and I think people need to be find ways in which they can talk about what really matters to them. I think there was New South Wales did a survey recently, and 80% of the workforce said that it really mattered to them that their organisations was tackling climate change. 80% of the population. I know we've got similar levels here, and we've got to forget what the right wing press are trying to tell us, that it's all woke and nobody really cares. No, they're actually on the wrong side of history, because actually more and more people, probably the majority, do care. But we're the silent majority, and we've got to talk about it, and we've got to encourage those conversations so people go, oh yeah, it's normal. Oh right, and I can do something about it.
I've got one more question, and we're kind of coming to the end of today's show, so unfortunately we won't have time for much more, but I've been asked something that I think you mentioned to me when we had a chat before recording this show today, as something to bring up. So I think it's a good question to have. And somebody's asked, they're at the beginning of their career and they're wanting to make a difference. And what advice do you give to them? What resources are available to them?
Brilliant. Well, first of all, I think there's a little bit of inner work to do, a little bit of work to do by yourself, which is to really understand what your skills are, well, what your strengths are. So, what are you good at, and what do you love? And so you could write to a column of what am I good at, big long list, and then cover that up, big long list, what do I love? And then a middle column, what do I love and I'm good at? And then also, what do I love and I'd love to get better at? So you want to really tune into the stuff that lifts your heart. Time disappears when you're doing it. So you start with yourself. And then you go, okay, what are the areas, the sectors, the topics that really excite me? That I've got a passion for. And there's lots of steers for this, because it could be, what do you keep on wanting to listen to on podcasts, or what catches your eye on any watching you're doing on the TV, or if you're looking at books or things to read, what keeps on taking your attention? So pay attention to where your attention and focus goes, because there's a lot of information there. I find it quite useful with my coaching clients to get them to look at the sustainable development goals, or look at the diagram for donut economics that you can find if you just Google donut economics. What's the image? And just see, out of all these areas that are there, or the SDGs, where do you feel that pull to? So you find what you're interested in, and find that talent, that what you can offer, and then start to look in those sectors and start to sort of see, well, what are the types of things that will offer me those kind of experiences. There's a great book out by Tracy Lewis called My Green Career. You can get that on Amazon, and that came from this program, but also gives you loads of information about exactly how to get started. So hopefully that's answered that question. There's loads more I could say, but I'm conscious of time, but hopefully, some steer for everybody there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that definitely answers that person's question. I know a lot of our listeners are on that younger end of the spectrum, as in beginning their career. So hopefully, if you're listening now, and that was your question, or you are in that same dilemma too. You're starting that career and you do want to, really figure out what you can do to make that difference in your direction. Hopefully, well, I mean, there sounds like a lot of resources that you just mentioned then. So there's a lot out there to help people now. And it's just about, like you said, setting down what matters to you, what you're good at, and working out your direction and spending that time.
Yeah. And also, don't get disheartened. Trying to get a job in this space has always felt a little bit tricky. So in 19, wherever it was, a long time ago, I felt I could never get a job. And sometimes you just take the foot, take something, get going. You get experience, even if it might not be exactly where you think you want to be, but be open to ideas. Be open to ideas. Look at opportunities, and just see it as it's often a swiggly path. It's not get a job and that's it for life. It's not going to be like that. I don't think it was ever completely like that, but be prepared. But I would always recommend doing that tune in, do a little career audit, 2 years in, how am I doing? But don't give up, just keep going. I was coaching a lady who's actually transitioning into sustainability. It took a whole year, but she did it, and she's in exactly the right place where she wanted to be. But she had to have that resilience. So you have to look after yourself, look after your well-being, and just keep going.
And that time frame is going to be different for everyone, I guess.
Oh,
You
absolutely,
never know what's
absolutely.
going to come up, but that's really good advice, especially for someone like me as well. I'm at the beginning of my career also, along with a lot of our listeners. So for me as well, listening is really reassuring, and it's nice to listen to somebody kind of who is, well established in their career, and how they've got to where they are, and to hear, it's not that linear thing. You don't have to know straight away. You end up where you end up, and it will be right for you. But unfortunately, we have run out of time for today's show. So just for the final minute, Rhian, how do people reach out to you? How do people get involved in the Women in Sustainability Network if what they've heard today has made them think that's something I want to be part of?
Brilliant. Well, come and follow us on LinkedIn, Women in Sustainability Network. That's probably where we're most active. We also have an Instagram account, Women Sustainability Network. We've moved off X. You can sign up for our newsletter. We do a weekly-ish network news. So that's on our website, womeninsustainability.net. And so, yeah, come and get engaged that way, I think. And keep an eye out. You never know, there could be a WINS cafe or a women's sustainability event that's happening near you. But if you get on our mailing list, then you'll hear about it, and then you can come in. And then if you really like the look of it, come and join the membership. There's womensustainability.net/subscribe, and you can check the membership out.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for coming on today and joining us and giving up your time. It's been so interesting having you on and really inspiring for you. I've found it. I've loved having you on. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you all so much for listening to today's episode of The Earth Show. Your support really does mean so much, and I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review, a rating, a comment if you enjoyed listening today. And don't forget to follow or subscribe to our podcast on here and follow at @the_earth_show for more content on Instagram as well. And if you'd like to get in touch, I'd love to hear from you on info.theearthshow@gmail.com. But in the meantime, all that's left to say is don't forget to share this podcast with your friends if you've enjoyed it today. And from me, a massive thank you for listening and have a wonderful week. Speak to you soon.